Good morning. I'm Jennifer Harmoning with the Burnsville Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us for our first Burnsville Chamber Business Briefing this morning on February 28th, 2025. We're here this morning to get updates from our school district, from our city, and from the Minnesota Chamber on what's happening at the Capitol. So we're going to kick off this morning. I'm glad to be joined this morning by Scott Hume, who serves on the Board of Education for Burnsville Egan Savage School District. And Scott, can you give us a little update on what's happening with the schools today?
Sure can. Good morning, and thanks for having me. Just a couple of updates. I think since the last meeting I attended, this happened. We had a board resignation in early January. Safio Mersal resigned for personal reasons at the beginning of January. And so since that time, we went through a process of opening up for people to let us know that they were interested. And then we interviewed candidates. And 2 weeks ago, we appointed Tyler Saxe, who will serve out the remainder of her term. Because there were less than 2 years remaining in Safio's term, state law that was passed, I believe, last year or the year before, allows us to appoint someone to fulfill the rest of her term rather than having to have a very expensive special election later this year. So Tyler will be joining the board at the end of March. At our March 27th meeting, he'll officially be sworn in and will be serving out her term through the end of 2026 and beyond if he runs for election and gets elected, I suppose. So that's one update. My second update, you probably have heard about, several of you. It's definitely been in the paper the last 3 or 4 weeks. The city council voted down our developer's proposal for the Sioux Trail property. So we don't know what the exact next steps are, other than presumably going back to the drawing board in some fashion. So that has happened. So any sale of Sioux Trail is paused until next steps are determined, I guess. And then the third update that I wanted to share is that we are well underway in beginning our conversations around the budgeting for the 2025-26 school year. As with many school districts, we are expecting to make some pretty significant adjustments this year, in part due to a lot of uncertainty from the state and federal levels, but also when 80% of your costs are people and increases in funding don't even keep up with the rate of health insurance increases, at some point things have to be adjusted. So I don't know what specific adjustments may be coming. We're having a board presentation. There'll be Dr. Battle, the superintendent, will be presenting her initial recommendations to the board at one of our meetings in March. So we'll know more in the coming month about what the future may hold. So those are the updates I had for this morning, unless there are any, I don't know if you want to do questions now or later, but those are the updates I had.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. We'll hold the questions till the end, so take your notes and
Okay.
we'll roll right into Dan Keeley with the City Council in Burnsville to give us some city updates.
Thank you, Jennifer. Had I known we'd be heavily represented with community development, I would have customized my list to give proper respect to that group, but thanks for being here this morning. I've got a few things I'll run through pretty rapidly. City Council held our annual offsite work session on Monday, February 3rd. Covered a lot of subjects, including, of course, the healing process from the February 18th tragedy last year. We also discussed a new community visioning project, which is very all-encompassing, demands a lot of staff time. So it's something that we're doing over the next couple of years. We also staff reviewed a lot of major projects that were completed in 2025 and noted some 2025 plans. The largest of that would be the largest capital project in the history of Burnsville, which is a renovation extension of our police department and city hall. We're a little bit landlocked, so for the police department to expand, they needed to move into square footage of the city. So the city hall has to push out the back of the building. Construction bids were accepted through yesterday, so the process is moving along. We are already on the 2026 budget. The next meeting is financial management plan review at our work session on March 25th, which was actually moved from March 11th due to 3 of us on council attending the National League of Cities in Washington, D.C. We're considering approving a 2025 budget amendment to use operational savings to fund 6 additional firefighters this year, instead of waiting till next year when it was in our capital plan for employee staff expansion. 2 reasons: new fire department workforce hired in recent years really have a significant resistance to a lot of overtime. Traditionally, fire and police, going back decades and decades, they all wanted as much overtime as they could get. The new recruits are saying, you know, work-life balance is more important. We don't really want a lot of mandatory overtime. So we're adjusting staffing. And then just demands. Our call volumes continue to increase, and our coverage requirements are such that we need to add more staff. So we're forwarding 6 firefighters in 2025 that would have been for 2026. Latest news on the garage, very disappointing to me personally. The garage youth music venue operated by Twin Cities Catalyst Music, a nonprofit that was formed years ago in partnership with the school district and the city. We had a Burnsville Youth Collaborative. This was the post-youth garage era, and it really was great. It offered classes in conjunction with the high school on audio engineering and music industry related. And they have indicated that they are going to close, and they requested a early termination notice of the joint powers agreement. So for me as a musician, and I know for a lot of musicians and young folks out there, it's a big loss, unfortunate closure. Experienced Burnsville, who's a part of this group, usually with Amy or Skip, are presenting their annual plan to the city council on April 8th. And we have a big deal coming up. This has been involved in Jeff and Travis's area. The pickleball proposal at Alley Magnet Park is being discussed on April 15th at our work session. That is one of the most contentious issues we've dealt with for a long time. We've had a packed house at the city council every meeting for the last 6 meetings. They are the most well-organized, well-informed, and well-presenting neighborhood group that I have ever experienced in now 19 years on council. So that's going to be an interesting discussion. And then finally, I just brought up at a recent meeting roundtable that we take a look at our rental property. I'm a big fan of putting resources where they're needed. And for a lot of our rental property owners who are very good providers, very good actors, they get an inspection of a third of their property every year. And they, year over year, they get a great, essentially, scorecard. But we have other apartment owners who are not good actors and create a lot of problems, demand a lot of staff time. And our ordinance only requires that we inspect a third of the units every year. So it takes 3 years to inspect the entire. We do have some indication through or provisions through safety, public safety, and fire safety to be able to inspect more than just a third. But I really would like to have a discussion at council on how we can improve that in our ordinance, where we can go into a problem rental unit and really inspect the entire thing. At the same time, I really want to get back to the carrot that we used to have years ago and offer some benefits to those who are always good scorers, and maybe not inspect them as frequently. Why do we go in every year and inspect a third of their units when they're always very good about everything and their apartments are kept up and very well maintained? Like, maybe we should consider delaying those that cycle. So just trying to align resources with where the problems are. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the update. We are a couple minutes ahead of schedule, so Laura Bordelon's logging in a few minutes. I hate to put them on the spot, but I will. I know that both Beth Weber and Jeff and Travis are here from the city's Community Development Department. Are there any additional updates from the city that you'd like to share since we have a few minutes here?
Jennifer, I'll jump in here and just
Great.
provide a quick update to Scott's comments. We did meet with the Sioux Trail developer following the council meeting. I think it was 2 weeks or so ago. And at that time, Scott's not wrong. They informed us that they'd be going back to the school district and possibly renegotiating their purchase agreement and talking about what a subsequent development might look like. So we're anticipating that they'll come back to us perhaps in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have a new proposal to reevaluate.
Great. And Travis, since not everybody has had a chance to meet you yet, could you share a little bit about your role with the city and since you started here?
Yeah, so I'm 120 days in or so,
Yeah.
I think, with the city of Burnsville. So I'm Deputy Community Development Director, and Jeff and I are kind of splitting the department. So I oversee the planning division, our small but mighty economic development team, which is me and Beth, and then our neighborhood services team. So that covers kind of code enforcement and rental housing, which is the program that Councilmember Keeley was speaking about. I've been doing this work for 20 plus years. I started my career in Bloomington, but for the past 10 years, I've been doing a very similar role with the city of St. Paul, where I oversaw, as a deputy director, oversaw the Department of Safety and Inspections for about 6 years, and then transferred over to Planning and Economic Development as a deputy director for about 4 years. So everybody asks me, why did you leave the city and what attracted you to Burnsville? And my wife and I, and so I live in Bloomington and have lived there for about 20 years. And I really wanted to do this type of work in the community that I spend, the majority of my time in. And it's been great so far. I really enjoyed all of the projects that I've worked on thus far, and there's a lot more work yet to be done. So I'm looking forward to working with you all in the future and trying to bring Burnsville to its full potential.
Well, welcome, Travis. Thank you so much. And thank you. I don't know if Jeff or Beth have anything to add. We appreciate the whole team and your connections to the chamber, keeping us in the loop here. Jeff or Beth, anything?
I don't. I think,
Okay.
Yeah, but if there
Great.
are questions, happy to.
Thanks for being here and for the partnership. So, and with that, give me just a second here. I'll put her on the spot the minute she walks in the virtual door. So I think nothing like just walking into the room here, Laura, so to speak, but just joining us now is Laura Bordelon, the Senior Vice President of the Minnesota Chamber's Advocacy Team. And just as she gets her audio set up and everything, I just want to say that our focus topic this morning is a legislative update. The Burnsville Chamber is part of the Minnesota Chamber Federation, which means that we partner on advocacy on statewide business issues. The 2025 Federation theme this year is Costs Matter. I'll let Laura go into that a little bit. A few of the priorities include good governance through accountability and transparency, pro-growth tax system that improves competitiveness, and bipartisan solutions to reduce costs.
Good morning.
With that, good morning, Laura.
I have a little slide deck that I would love to share with you, Jennifer. If you
Oh.
can do a sharing, I will pop my slides up.
I will give you sharing permissions here. Yep. There
How
we
is
go.
everybody? Good big group this morning.
Yeah, thanks. You should be good to go now.
Okay. Let me find them. It's been a really interesting and slightly bumpy start to our session. I think you all probably understand why. It's we are just in a such an unusual spot in our state in terms of this kind of power sharing situation we have going on. So here we go. So as most of you know, our state is unusually politically divided. We might be the closest legislature in the country. we have a Senate caucus that's basically the same head count as it was in the previous session. So there's 34 Democrats and 33 Republicans, but we have this new dynamic going on where we have a blue dog coalition of more moderate Democrats who say they want to have more influence over the types of issues that come to the floor and are voted on. The House is currently controlled by Republicans. That will change in a couple of weeks, but right now there's a 67 to 66 count of Republicans to Democrats. The thing that's really so interesting to me is we have this, we have a lot of new people at the legislature. We have 21 new members. Many folks in the Democrat caucus have never served in the minority. More than half of the members in the Republican caucus have never served in the majority. So it's a very interesting dynamic in terms of experience, how to run committees, and just understanding issues. So the must-dos for this year are the legislature has to balance their budget, and they have to do it no later than June 30th. The state runs on a fiscal calendar of July 1st through June 30th. And I don't know if you remember past sessions, but we've had instances where they don't get their work done on time and we go into a shutdown, and that affects many, many things. It can affect everything from prisons to state patrols to how state employees are paid, getting your fishing license. It has some pretty serious impacts. So needs to be avoided at all costs if possible. The other big issue that I think is coming their way this year is this question about what's happening with the federal budget. And I'll show you a slide in a minute that gives you an indication of how much Minnesota relies on federal dollars. But there's just a lot of questions about the impacts of what is being decided by Congress and at the federal level with how that's going to impact Minnesota programs. And the other must-do this year is reauthorizing reinsurance that affects people in the fully insured market. And without that reinsurance to buy down rates, rates spike. And that happened, I think, in 2014. So just a quick spin through of what happened in the previous session in 23-24. An $18 billion budget surplus was almost exhausted. This was on top of a base budget of $53 million. The legislature increased taxes by $10 billion, and that resulted in a 37% growth in the state budget. In addition to just extraordinary spending and huge new taxes, there are a lot of regulatory issues that were passed that have been really problematic for the employment community or businesses. There were 35 new workplace mandates that were passed. Paid family and medical leave. There was an earned sick and safe time program enacted. Labor standards boards, which basically are a way of controlling the workplace. You would have a labor board that would determine benefits, pay, scheduling, very worrisome new trend that we've seen come out of California. The Minneapolis City Council debated a labor standards boards recently, and the mayor vetoed it, thankfully. But this is something we're watching, and we have one in Minnesota passed last session that deals with nursing homes. There are non-compete agreements. There are many, many workplace mandates. In fact, 35 workplace mandates were passed in the previous session. And then in addition to those workplace mandates, a lot of regulations, everything from PFAS, which I think people are familiar with that chemical. It sticks around and it is very useful, but also problematic for the environment. Our state has decided to ban 11 products that contain PFAS, and you can see the list on the slide. They're also going to require by January 1st of next year reporting of PFAS in any product with the exception of medical devices. And then the state will fully ban anything containing PFAS by the year 2032. I had a friend who asked me why she could buy an air fryer recently, even though they're banned. And the answer is because the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has not started enforcing it yet. And then there's a number of new permitting requirements, including air monitoring, water use, and odor emissions. So as I mentioned, the big to-do item for this session is balancing the state's budget. And in the most recent November forecast, we got some bad news, and that is the state is spending more money than it's receiving in revenues. So if they hadn't left $3.7 billion unspent, we would be in a deficit this year. So if you take the spending and you also add to it discretionary inflation that the legislature has built into budgets, the balance that we have on the bottom line for the next 2 years is $616 million. That is nothing when it comes to budgeting. And then the state typically looks at a 4-year window when they're determining what their budget should be. The budget balance or the budget amount in the next fiscal year, the planning budget year 28-29, is a deficit of $5.1 billion. So there's some pretty sobering numbers that this new group of legislators is going to have to deal with. And as I said, unlike the federal government, the states have to balance their budget every single year. They can't borrow and do continuing resolutions. Excuse me. So this was the big change in the state's budget forecast from the end of session to November. We've seen big drops in the individual income tax and in the general sales tax. Those are important categories for generating revenues. And as you can see, they've shifted quite a bit compared to what we expected them to be back at the end of session. I thought this chart was kind of interesting because it shows the current sources of funding that come into the state. Taxes is the biggest source of funding. So that's everything from sales taxes, income taxes, corporate sales taxes. The other big category is this gray bar section, and that's federal grants. $12 billion $12 billion comes from the federal government just for Medicaid spending in our state alone. And I know there's been a lot of chatter about if Medicaid is going to be cut. We don't know. There's been no specifics yet on what the federal government is going to do, but that could have a really significant impact on Minnesota's budget. And then this is the spending areas. It's interesting now the Department of Management and Budget now calls these bill areas. It's just, budget buckets. So the biggest one is Health and Human Services. That's healthcare services for elderly, disabled, lower income individuals and families. Next biggest is E12 education. That's early learning through K-12. That doesn't include higher ed. Higher ed is down in that blue box on the right-hand corner. Commerce is a big spending area, so is transportation. So is public safety, state government, property taxes, as well as servicing the debt on state bonds. So that's a complete picture of all the different spending that happens across Minnesota's state budget. So as Jennifer mentioned, our theme this year is Costs Matter. We are paying close attention to what is decided at the state capitol because that budget balance is so small. I will tell you, regardless of that only $616 million balance, there are a lot of funding requests that are being proposed at the Capitol, everything from more school funding and local government funding, support for social services and healthcare programs, wastewater infrastructure, higher education. I know that the University of Minnesota has requested over $235 million in appropriations from the state, which is, starting to spend that $616 million down pretty quickly. Some people are advocating for tax cuts. There is a lot of interest in cleaning up, repealing, delaying, changing some of the mandates and bills proposed and passed in the past session. Sports betting and stadiums are always kind of in the mix. Bonding is another issue that's being debated. Data centers, the list is very, very long on not just spending ideas, but policy proposals. We do a poll every single summer of about 400 of our members, and we add in 200 non-members and ask them what you want us to focus on and the issues that you're concerned about. And number one, every single year that we've done this, and I've been here for a long time, and I think for 20 years, it's been reducing taxes. There is such high sensitivity in Minnesota about not just the business taxes, but the individual taxes, because that affects talent recruitment. If you're a pass-through entity and you're successful, you're paying a very high rate on your business taxes as well. What's changed in our polling recently is the number 2 issue for many years used to be healthcare costs. And then that got superseded by hiring and finding workers. Those are now all shifting down as our members and non-members are expressing more concerns about costs and reducing government spending. So we are hearing that emphatically from our members, is that they're worried about the costs in our state. They're worried about regulations. They're worried about government spending. So costs matter. We want to see a balanced budget with no new taxes and no new mandates, hopefully on time. We are encouraging legislators to get a handle on fraud and abuse. There is a very high amount of government fraud happening in Minnesota, over $600 billion. It is I think, as I say that, I'm thinking million. It is an enormous number. The Feeding Our Future case that's in the news is obviously kind of the top line, but there's instances across other government programs, including childcare, unemployment insurance. There's just a lot of unaccountability going on in our state government. And the Office of Legislative Auditor has made a number of recommendations on how to get a handle on this that we think are pretty straightforward and the state agencies should comply with. There is a unique committee in the House run by Representative Kristen Robbins to look specifically at government fraud and abuse. And the other is flexibility in the implementation of the big new workplace mandates that include paid family leave and earned sick and safe time. In terms of our economic competitiveness, we would very much like to see the state's research and development credit extended and allow for some refundability. We are an incredibly innovative state. Billions of dollars are spun off from these companies in terms of the amazing products and services they are creating, and the research and development credit helps spur that forward. We also are keeping a close eye on another federal government consideration, which is the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that expires this year, and it has implications for Minnesota. We are not a tax conforming state. We don't automatically conform with what the feds do, so we'd have to have a bill that would specifically look at any changes they propose and make those changes at the state level. We are, again, this year pushing forward environmental permitting reform, hopefully making some more progress. We've got good bipartisan support, and this affects everything, not just mining, but it's dry cleaning and bakeries and paint shops and water usage. So it has broad economic implications for our state. We need to see reinsurance pass, as I mentioned before. We'd like to see the state lift its ban on considering building additional nuclear energy. As most of you know, AI and a lot of the data demands require a lot more energy, and we are constrained by not allowing possible consideration of nuclear power as part of our energy mix. And the other thing, and this we've heard from a lot of local chambers, is we'd like to make a requirement on the North Star Promise, which is a tuition-free program for income-eligible kids, to ask them to stick around in Minnesota for 3 years after the state helps subsidize their tuition. The state of South Dakota did this with their BUILD program, and it has been very, very effective and kind of hurting some of our border communities down in the southwestern part of Minnesota. So I want to cover paid family and medical leave real quick, because I know this is very much in the forefront of people's minds. We have been proposing a number of different considerations for policymakers, everything from delaying the implementation to a year to make sure employers can be ready, to make sure the state's tech system works, and that people have a good experience when they apply for their leave. We'd love to see the number of weeks reduced to 12. Right now, it's a 12 plus 12 leave program. So 12 weeks of family leave, 12 weeks of medical leave, capped at 20 weeks. We would very much like to see the family eligibility definition adjusted. Now it's very broad and includes affiliated relationships and could be ripe for fraud. We'd like to see that tightened up, or maybe even compliant with FMLA, which most businesses know how to comply with. A small business exemption for entities that have 30 employees or less. We would very much like to see the wage replacement changed. Right now, if you are at a lower income threshold, 90% of your wages are covered. We would prefer to see that lowered so that people are encouraged to come back to work when they're ready. Just by comparison, the unemployment insurance wage replacement is 55%, and short-term disability is usually around 67%. So at 90%, that's a very generous benefit. We would also like to see employers who offer a more generous leave program and a higher wage replacement have an equivalency option. So if they want to provide 100% of wage replacement for 6 or 8 weeks, that would be equivalent to the state's plan. And then we would also ask for an exemption for temporary and seasonal workers. So in terms of predictions for end of session, this is always dangerous, but I'm gonna give it my best shot, and you can call me and tell me I'm wrong in May if none of this comes to pass. We're expecting, or I'm expecting, there to be a base or lights on budget. There's just not enough money without increasing taxes to do more than that. And the House Republicans have said unequivocally, no new taxes in this budget, that Minnesota businesses and families are taxed enough. Only issues with meaningful bipartisan support will pass. And I know it's easy to claim bipartisan support if you get one person from the other side. As we've seen in the past couple of years, people in these caucuses don't break ranks from their party. They stick together. So maybe the Blue Dog Coalition will change that dynamic. Maybe because the House is going to be tied, that will change the dynamic. But we really think only true bipartisan issues will pass. The reason I listed humility for both the GOP and the DFL is because I think the past several weeks when Republicans have been in charge of the House, it's been kind of interesting for them. It's fun to be in charge, but running committees and advancing bills and paying attention to rules and process is challenging when you haven't done it before and been in the majority. And there's been some embarrassing moments, and I think they're learning wonderful procedural lessons from it. Similarly, the Democrats, so many of them have never served in the minority. It's kind of hard to sit there and listen to someone else debate the issues that they care most about and vote against them and really not have any impact. So I see this as a positive thing for our legislature, and hopefully it'll build an appreciation for how hard it is to pass things and encourage more compromise. In terms of the governor's budget recommendations, I don't know if you're aware, but he has proposed a sales tax expansion on certain services. So brokerage services, legal fees, CPAs. He's calling it kind of a tax on the more well-to-do. I think if you're a low-income person and you need help with your child custody or divorce, that you shouldn't necessarily have to pay a tax on that. We support broadening the sales tax base and lowering the rate, but this really just kind of broadens the base and increases the rate. So we don't support the governor's sales tax expansion proposal. We do support his interest in expanding or extending reinsurance. We don't like necessarily how he pays for it, but we do think reinsurance is needed to pass. And he also has a position supporting the research and development credit and refundability of that credit, which we support and like. The other thing I would make in terms of a prediction is the political distractions are going to continue. So a week or so ago, when Senator Tina Smith announced that she was not going to run again for the U.S. Senate, every Democrat was on their phone. Every Republican was being asked by the press if they were going to run for the Senate. And some have said, well, no, I don't want to run for the Senate, but I'm interested in running for governor. So it has scrambled kind of the political landscape more than I would have realized. I think a lot of people are seriously considering running, including the lieutenant governor. The governor recently said he's going to run for a third term, which is unprecedented in our state. So a lot of political roiling. It feels like we just got done with the election and here we are back into politics. So some key dates for you to keep in mind is we will get this final state budget forecast next week, which is a huge moment. We'll see if revenues have stabilized or if we're going deeper into deficit, which will make this session that much more complicated. The House will go back to an absolute tie. So as I mentioned, right now, the Republicans have a 1-vote majority. After the special election on March 11th, in a heavily leaning Democrat district, they will in all likelihood be tied at 67-67. So they won't be able to pass anything off the floor without a vote from the other side, or 2 or 3. The governor will revise his budget based on the new forecast. I'm not exactly sure when that's going to come out, maybe the week of the 10th of March 10th, maybe the week of the 17th. But we are really heading deep into the legislative session while we've been in this little bit of a political scramble. So the policy deadlines where you have to get bills out of certain committees will be coming up on us quickly. Our chamber day at the Capitol is April 3rd, and then they're supposed to adjourn on May 19th. So what's typically a 5-month session is going to feel like it's compressed into a 2-month session unless they go into overtime. And Jennifer, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions if the group has any questions.
Great, thank you so much. Laura, we're going to make a little transition here because please hang on for questions and discussion. As we wrap the recorded part of this program, just a reminder, as Laura mentioned, April 3rd will be a day at the Capitol. You'll see something on our website to join our Burnsville Coalition up there. And Friday, April 4th will be our next business briefing. So stay tuned for our focus topic for that, and I hope you'll join us for that. With that, I'm going to stop our recording of our business briefing and we'll move into questions. Thanks for joining us today.